button. So welcome everyone to Aotearoa Conversations. This has been brought to you by Akina and the Impact Initiative. This session here is backboning movements for impact. Very lucky to have Annie Ualesi from CALLED and Rebecca Davis from the Change and Innovation Agency with us as facilitators. I will pass over to them for the session. Thank you.
Kia ora Tan, thank you so much. Namahi nui kia koutou katoa, no mai haere mai kia koutou kua hui mai nei I tēnei ahi mo te kaupapa o backboning movements for impact. Ko wai au, ko Rebecca Davis tōku ingoa, he uri tēnei no Ngāti Raukawa ki te tonga, Ngāti Parau ki Haratonga, Te Arawa hoki, no reira tēnā koutou, tēnā rā tātou katoa. And hello, you beautiful people. It's so lovely to see you all here today. My name is Rebecca Davis. I've introduced you to my iwi, my tribes, and welcome you here to this masterclass, which is around backboning movements for impact. I am the director and founder of the Change and Innovation Agency. I set the agency up over 10 years ago, and because I always want to be self-employed, and but I'm hardcore Aotearoa, so I'm hardcore New Zealand proud. And I was really interested and passionate about how we influence the shape and shift of our country and society to where all communities in Aotearoa survive and thrive. And so I was really interested in that. And I had a personal interest in that because I have a very big family, or families, and I could see across our family that there were people not thriving and then people thriving, and there were a whole lot of reasons around that. So I was really interested in that side of it. I'm an impact strategist. That's the job title I gave myself, which I love. And I'm a strategist at heart. So I operate at the intersection between the current reality and the future reality, between the community and the system, and between people and place. And I play that in two roles. One is that I'm a facilitator, so I'm going to be co-facilitating with us today. And the second is I'm an impact player, so I get brought off the bench and inserted into leadership teams to manage strategic pivots when innovations are stalling or have gone down rabbit holes or are not getting the traction that they need. So I come in and accelerate the movements of innovation. It's so lovely to be with you. I'm looking forward to sharing everything that, things that we've learned through success and failure about what it takes to backbone a movement. Beautiful to see you. Tēnā koutou katoa. Annie.
Mamihi Dex, o te whaatalo whātu I le paia, ma le malo le tātou whaatisinga le nei aso, o lo ingo o Annie Ualesi, o le nuu o lo tamā o Malailai a le pata, o le nuu o lo tina o Vaiala. Welcome everyone. I've greeted you in the Samoan language and acknowledged my mother's and my father's villages in Samoa. I'm New Zealand Aotearoa born Samoan Chinese. So I've had I sit in the place of diversity, I guess. I am co-founder of CALLED, and along with Rebecca, we've also co-founded the Impact Village, which is really about sharing what we've learned and giving others the opportunity to share what they've learned about impact. I'm here to remind you that you are called to greatness and you are called to do something unique that only you are able to do. And we really hope time spent with us this afternoon supports you to do that. I coach governance, executive leadership and teams around social innovation, collective impact and systems change. So let's get started.
What's a movement, Annie?
The movement and why backboning movements for impact. For Rebecca and I mean, you can hear quite clearly, we have a Māori and a Samoan wahine here. So impact for us is about reducing and overturning the perpetual and persistent inequities for our communities, for our whānau, for those who sadly are not enjoying all the wonderful things that Aotearoa can offer. And for us, movements for impact, because it's about people like you and others being supported and joining movements of people for change. So that, I guess, just sets a little bit of the scene about the topic today.
And so what is backboning for us is that more and more now today, groups are coming together. Can you hear that building going on in the background? I'm so sorry. Oh, perfect. Thank you. More and more, everyone's realised that actually not one institution or government is going to solve some of our gnarly problems. And so more groups are coming together across sector and communities in order to be able to address issues and design for change. However, there's that real challenge of competing priorities, stretched leadership, time poor, and personalities and egos. So bringing groups together requires a backbone organisation or a backbone group that support that collective in order to generate momentum and create movement. And so, so the backbone role is, it's two things. Number one, it's the glue that holds the collective together. And its responsibility around that being the glue is to ensure that it holds the vision and the kaupapa and the compelling case for change up, so that everyone continuously always can see it and they hold it lightly rather than anchoring it in traditional strategies, so it's visible to all. And the second is, it's the nuts and bolts that generate action or momentum. So they are and initially we can think about that instantly, it's the administration, the comms, the coordinating and convening and the hosting, some of those nuts and bolts that create that momentum. Hey, but what we did want to do today is, there are two big pieces of work that Annie and I have and are working on that we wanted to share with you, and we'll use as the case study examples as we go through, so that we've got some practical examples or demonstrations of how some of the learning that we're going to share with you has worked. One of them is I'm the impact strategist for a significant piece of work in Whanganui, which is leading out the development and design of a suicide prevention strategy for the region. And I just want to acknowledge the Whanganui District Health Board and Healthy Families New Zealand for having the real courage to spin this out where it traditionally would be developed, which is in the DHB, and put it in the community and allowed a different approach to be applied when looking at suicide prevention. So the flip for this piece of work has been traditionally designed by the clinical model, is now to being co-designed with community, a whole of community approach and a systems thinking response. Kia ora. Annie.
Oh, thanks, Bex. The second example is a workplace wellbeing design challenge where Bex and I worked together with others. So I do want to acknowledge Rachel Enosa, Tapuvakai Vea, and the Healthy Families South Auckland team and the Cause Collective, along with our Māori and Pacific workers, the big businesses that were involved, and our Crown entity partners. And Bex and I, we work in the space of really flipping the script on stuff. So what was originally something to look at health and safety and reducing the incidence of and risk of injury and harm in the workplace, we were able to actually work with big business and workers to widen the vision and the aspiration to well-being in the workplace, and understanding how the conditions in the workplace can actually enhance or diminish people's well-being, but also for big business to understand and really step into their role as being yes, members of our local communities. So that's the other piece we'll talk to.
Awesome. So shall we have a look? This is kind of a framework that Annie and I adapted from what came out of Tamarick in I think it was 2016, around collective impact. And we adapted kind of that framework and model based on everything that we had learned in our years of doing this type of mahi, but also based on a lens, an Aotearoa lens, so a New Zealand lens where we could see what does and doesn't work. And so we just wanted to go through, spend some time today going through some of the things that we think are real standout things that probably need a bit more traction in Aotearoa, where people are starting to get hold of what they think are good practices and philosophies to have. And then the second thing was we wanted to look at some of the real things that we think are game changers, and we're just going to touch on them lightly. Of course, that's never enough time, an hour, to get under the skin of some of these really important philosophies and practices, but we hope that if you want to hang out with us later or get in touch, that we could spend more time. We might be able to share, in fact you might be able to share and help us learn as well. So a couple of things I want to point out to you too. These are techniques that I coach when I'm speeding up or accelerating innovation. One of them in Containers for Change, which really is where the backbone sits. You'll see this there, it says value diversity and create brave spaces. So valuing diversity is what I was mentioning before, but more and more organisations and communities realise we can't do this on our own. And in fact, when setting up governance groups or design thinking challenge teams or innovation teams, we talk about 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. You may have already heard of this because it's quite a common practice now. It's a growing movement. 1/3 would normally be those people, the end user or the people most impacted by either the problem and or the solution that you're designing or creating a movement for. Priority. And so that's 1/3, and then the second 1/3, or another 1/3 would be those people able to influence change. So those people who might be able to have policy or investment or hold the pen pretty much. And the other third is the unusual suspects, the people that aren't involved in this issue, that aren't a professional or practitioner in this space, and that they bring a whole different lens, which is completely non-biased and a whole lot of curiosity and expertise. Some of it might be completely left field, but we highly recommend those. And look, I was just in a Build Back Better hui yesterday actually, and resetting for a province and its recovery from COVID. And we'd been talking, and I've been challenging around why they'd put a collective movement to sit in under government agencies, and was just talking them through the importance of looking at Build Back Better and recovery needs to be 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 as an example. The other thing I just wanted to quickly touch on, Annie, did you want to share anything around that? Well, the other thing just under strategic learning and reflective practice, this is the other end, and this is a big shift that we need, innovation practices, but also to all of our frontline services at the moment, is reflective practice and the quality of reflective practice that needs to occur in real time. So we look at how close can you get to getting real-time data, real-time information, and real-time.
And then we're going to go back.
Hello. And so one of the techniques that we teach, and this also is a real common technique now in social innovation, is check, reflect, adapt, CRA. Check, where are we at? What's our current status? Are we where we thought we were going to be? Reflect, what have we learned? What have we noticed? What did we do well? What's failing? What direction do we need to take now that this is it working? Isn't it working? Who's benefiting from us at the moment? And then adapt is, do we have to pivot? So are we so far off course that we're just doing for the sake of doing? Or have we discovered that there's a whole new way of doing things? And in fact, this new direction is far more beneficial. And so therefore we're going to pivot and adapt and head in that direction. The key around this is it's usually lean. So it's not big, heavy invested projects that are 3 years until you find out that you've been successful or failed. It's lean prototyping, testing, and initiatives that can pivot, that are nimble. Annie, sorry.
No, I was going to actually speak to what you said, but I'm also interested because, you know, from the social enterprise perspective, which, you know, some of you will likely have come from or be in, you know, that ability to quickly learn and to quickly adapt your product or your service, and to, I think, to, you know, the element of safe to fail. You know, we've got to be upfront with that in Aotearoa now, and we don't want, as Beck said, to invest money for long terms for things with which, you know, they are off track. We've got to be brave enough to quickly notice and then change tack.
Sorry, were you asking for some feedback, Annie? No, we get into
happy to. Feel free to, yeah.
I think the other thing I just really wanted, Annie is brilliant at this next one. And so I just want to see another really important, when we look at authentic engagement and partnership, in the backboning of movements, you need the capability to be able to negotiate the exchange of value. So we're very much shifting people away from only ever coming to the table thinking that funding is going to create change. I think investment is definitely, you're going to need investment, but people also need to be able to come to the table and think, I can offer other value that's really essential in this movement. So being able to negotiate and make the ask for things that are not always funding. What I find is if people only come with a funding mindset that only money is going to create the change, we miss the leverage opportunities. And so when I think about that leverage opportunity, I think that rather than trying to negotiate for finances right up front or financial right up front, we should be looking at what exists and how do we leverage that, that resource and or that skill and capability that we need. And then the second thing, value is not always the dollar figure. So I think it's really important that when backboning movements, we're thinking about what is the exchange of value that partners bring to the table. Annie, did you want to add to that?
I think in Aotearoa we have the great benefit of only being separated by 2 degrees. And so our ability to connect really quickly with people of influence is, you know, that's easier for us than people in other places. And so really leverage that. And often when someone comes to the table or you meet someone, don't take at face value that that's all they are. As you get to know, you know, whakawhanaungataka, get to know the person, what's behind them, who's behind them, who are they connected to. It really, yeah, there are magnificent leverage points because of who we are and how closely we are connected. An investment may be a, you know, byproduct of that, but as you deepen those relationships, that's the and influence. I think that's the thing. We are all about supporting others to be influencers within their own spheres of influence, and then out and out it goes, the ripples.
I think one of the examples we've got is in the suicide prevention strategy in Whanganui. Currently, I mean, it's still in the final stages of being written up, but the entire traction plan, traction being all of the initiatives that will be in the startup phase that will create action or momentum, I should say, sorry, they've all been leveraged. So we haven't used, funding has never been a part of that conversation in this initial stage because we needed to leverage what was already existing as movement, strategy or resource, but also too so that people would lean into the complexity of the issue and would be open and willing, which actually was a phenomenal amount of willingness, I should say. So, but that we could generate participation is how I should have framed it, sorry. And people would be able to contribute and participate because their leverage and contribution was already in existence. So removing bureaucracy, so pace and depth become viable. If you've worked in innovation before and if you're entrepreneurs, you will know that at times you need pace. So you need to sometimes determine whether you are operating at speed and that there's real momentum, and so you know how to keep momentum with that pace. And other times you need to go deep. So it's the depth of thinking and the heavy lifting, intellectual lifting and relationship building and design that needs to occur that requires you. Often bureaucracy doesn't allow you to do that. So if you're partnering with bureaucrats or the system, that often the layers of bureaucracy can slow you down unless you've got entrepreneurs or change makers sitting in the institutions. So negotiating that and removing that in the containers of change is essential.
Nothing from me, Bex, you go.
Oh, well, we're on to cultural security, Annie. So this is a really big part of cultural security for Annie and I is a real big part of backboning and supporting collectives to do remarkable things. And for us, I think cultural security is the ability, actually, we've picked 3 things that we really wanted to talk about and give you examples for. It's the ability to create brave spaces, and we've put that, obviously, you can see in the containers for change. So the number one thing is to check our own bias. So we come into a space or we set up a brave space and we just make sure that we've got enough self-reflection that we're aware of if we have bias. And a really good example of this, and I just used it yesterday in a collective reset, was I have a high tolerance level of risk because I know how to de-risk innovation and I know how to mitigate risk. So I'm comfortable with taking risks. So sometimes when you go into these brave spaces, and particularly if you're creating them, if you're a risk taker or you're comfortable with risk, you might bring that into the room. So I like to ensure that we're always aware of our own bias.
Yeah, in a real world context too, if I think about the Workplace Wellbeing Design Challenge, there are some assumptions because of our personal bias. So when we're talking about well-being, it's interesting how quickly managers jump to, well, if my workers just could learn how to cook, then that would solve a whole lot of stuff. What that demonstrates is the level of disconnection between some of our decision makers and the realities of many of our families and a growing number of our families in New Zealand for which poverty is an everyday reality, and the compounded toxic stress of that sort of living. And so often it's important to, if you're backboning movements of change, to think about how you can bring those, allow people to see their bias or be aware of their bias, and for them to be very self-managing too, of when they're bringing that bias into conversations, and more importantly into the solutions for problems that they don't necessarily understand in any real depth. I mean, the fact to say, sorry Bex, I was just going to say, again, to me, whakawhanaungatanga done well throughout, that it's the depth of understanding of each other and the context in which we live that helps us, that helps to some of those biases to come to the surface, but in a safe way.
So what we thought we'd do at this point is do a bit of a breakout session and put you into some breakout rooms. And we're really interested to know of what you've heard so far, and particularly around aware of your own bias, but the things that we've just been talking about. what are you doing really well in your mahi in terms of backboning or supporting movements, but even in your work? And then what are you really challenged about when you hear some of what we're talking about? So we're thinking of sending small groups and just a quick rapid kōrero together. So we're thinking maybe of just 6 minutes into the group, and then come back and we might do some popcorn sharing. So we just, and even just sharing in the chat as well, because we're just really interested to know, what are you learning about backboning movements, or what are you learning from our conversation at the moment? What are you doing remarkably, which is so good to share if you could, and then what's really challenging you in your mahi at the moment. So Tan, if we could go small, intimate groups, and 6 minutes, if that's okay with everyone, it'd be great to hear what you all have to say and share.
Absolutely, Rebecca. Would you like 3 groups? Is that
perfect? Yep. Beautiful.
Cool. What will happen, everyone, is that you'll be put into the breakout rooms automatically. About 5 minutes in, you'll get a message from myself just to say, give you a notice that you've got a minute, and then what will happen is you'll automatically come back to the main room. Okay, so when you get that broadcast, just stay in the meeting because it will automatically take you out. Thanks very much.
Hello.
Welcome back, everyone. We'll pass you back to our facilitators.
How'd that go? Just a bit of popcorn. Anyone want to share anything from that session? Be great if you could, for those of us who didn't join you. And go. Any thoughts?
6 minutes goes really fast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How'd it go in there, Matthew?
Oh, it was awesome. Yeah, just the conversation was about how long it can take. You know, if you're impatient and you want to speed things up, yeah, it's hard to do that. You just got to take time.
Yeah,
true. Great work over there in Aotearoa, by the sounds of it, and but yeah, just got to keep going.
Yeah, that's so true, and it's that challenge, isn't it? Often it's the pressure points to speed up are not the natural pressure points. You know, the innovation pressure points are natural, I feel, but sometimes it's the institutional or other.
Yeah, end of budget year or something like that, or there's a budget end.
And I think the other thing, hey, Matthew, hearing what you're saying, it's because it's big change, right? So it's not overnight. One of the things that that we do a lot is progressive wins, because it's so long term. The ability to quickly recognize what a win can look like along the way, so that you and your partners and the movement you're supporting can feel that momentum, you know, feel a sense of momentum in whatever those wins are. And sometimes a win is just some massive learning that, you know, or whatever it can be, just to assist, because you're right. It's, overturning systems that have been placed for a long time and ways of working takes time.
It's too true. Anyone else want to share anything that came out of their kōrero?
Sherry, should I speak on your behalf? Given your voice is so bad, Sherry has lost her voice, so she's done really well talking to me, but I would hate her having to repeat everything. So I'll give myself a challenge of like pulling out a few of the points you made, Cherish, about your work, and please do correct me if like my interpretation is not right. But Cherish talked about her work at Healthy Families, and she highlighted quite a bit, building on your point around attracting the willing, and you know, talking to like how, you know, the work really starts with the people and with their values, and you know, how it takes time also to build the relationships with the community or that group or whoever they are, and in your own context, Cherish, like that happens like during working hours, but also like out on the street and at the supermarket, because of the size of the community. And all of these touch points are very important. And how, you know, if you do that work well with the right intentions, actually the willing that come your way aren't necessarily the people you expected anyway in the first place, which was very interesting. And then in terms of challenges, you talked to, you know, the influencing part and advocating and negotiating maybe with a different space, for instance, like, you know, central government, and how demanding that is, and how, you know, that it can be sometimes outside of your comfort zone, or it can feel like an additional weight when you're doing the work on the ground, and and that's very important, but also like very heavy. Yeah.
That's awesome. I think it's a pretty good summary. Don't you agree, Cherish? Frick. I felt like I was in the breakout room with you. Well done. That's awesome, Elaine. I wonder if you've got any, does anyone else just wave at us if you want to share? Because we're really keen to hear. Otherwise, if you want to download some of your thoughts in the chat room, that'd be amazing as well. Because I'm just cognizant that we have, oh no, we've got a bit of time. Yeah, so if you're keen to share, please do.
I might just add too, while people are thinking of jumping into the space, and thanks, Helene, for sharing what Cherish was sharing with you. I think there's a really important role of the backbone around advocacy and around storytelling for change, storytelling for decision makers that actually makes it impossible for them not to action what it is you are advocating for. And so as a backbone, the whole storytelling, communications, the progressive, that's a really critical function of a backbone, is to know how to gather those stories, how you share those stories, and then how you hold leadership to account because of those stories and insights that have come out. And it'd be really interesting, Cherish too, and others who are challenged with that. How do you use the 2 degrees of separation? Because there'll be no doubt people who know somebody who is in a position of influence, and how do you move into that sphere, and how might you tap into some mentoring or someone else who could support you and your team to do that really strategically. And I did mean to say, sorry, that Bex and I will be staying on the line after this session too, for anyone who wants to, some one-to-one chat, support, whatever.
I think that storytelling and the progressive wins also help the well-being of the staff and the innovators and the change makers working in the mahi. So without knowing, often when you're in the doing and the chaos of innovation and working in complexity, sometimes you miss the fact that some of the things you've done have actually been a real lever or a catalyst for shifting gear. And when you're in the changemaker doing, you often don't notice it or acknowledge it. And so I do think that we designed the progressive wins method in order to be able to look continuously throughout the innovation journey to understand what is, and also it's good learning. An example would be if you're in design, when we think about a typical Western organized businesses organizing structure, it's diamond shape. Actually, in Māoridom, our world is circular. So and sitting in our world that is circular is the environment and all living things that exist with humans in there. So we don't look at power structures in the diamond and the triangle shape. We look in them as circular, and the same as in innovation has to be thought of as in circular.
I think too, the practical aspects of flattening the power structure. As the backbone organization, when you are inviting people to come, you must ensure everybody feels safe, and a lot of prep goes in beforehand. It doesn't mean you just invite and convene a conversation and then everyone is expected to come in at the same level. There's real preparation involved, and particularly those in status roles, in roles of hierarchy over others. Your role as the backbone is to prep them beforehand. When you come into the space, this is the expectation. And even during sessions when you are facilitating, Bex and I, we tag team. I'll come alongside someone who is not, you know, often you must step in. It is your role to step in to keep everybody safe and be very aware of the power dynamics in the conversations that you are inviting others to. Yeah, the practice of that's very important for a backbone organisation.
And a good point. And also to remember that there's a lot of power dynamics in community. So not just in organisation and systems, but also in the community. So we have a lot of people that will come to the table that hold leadership roles in the community. And so it's important to understand and know what those look like too. And often they're from a cultural perspective as well. The third thing we think is really important is reciprocity. So bringing people together should be about a mutually beneficial experience, so that when you're creating these spaces and supporting people in this movement, it always should be mutually beneficial. So people should be gaining as well as their koha or their contribution into the space. And that's fundamental, but the real important thing for a backbone role is that it has to be demonstrable. You have to be able to demonstrate it. So demonstrating that you're adding value and that people are receiving value by being involved is critical. And even those intangible things, when people leave having done some really heavy work with you and a collective disperses, you'll get those text messages or the emails or the phone calls going, God, that was a great session. It changed the way I thought about something and I caught my own bias in something. People have real personal reflections as a part of being something where it's reciprocal, where there's a reciprocity and a trade and exchange of value.
I think so much of what that value can be is in the learning that you can then utilize in your workspace or you know, in what you are doing, and others can too. So if I think of a particular example recently where, you know, Bex brought me into a regional piece of work that is outside of where I live. But what was amazing was there was an expert in that room who was speaking to suicide prevention, who is like a leading expert. And what he shared in that session with me meant that when I was speaking to a group of youth pastors in South Auckland who are trying to support families and young people during COVID, I was able to share with them what that expert shared with me. And so the information flow is so very valuable, and we must, as the backbone, that's part of the value, is opening up those channels of information which historically have been only held by a few. You know, another real value point of a backbone is to be sharing the information and creating the openness of information too. It doesn't need to come into you to go out. It's as you're building that movement that everybody is kind of creating their own ecosystem of information sharing. And yeah, it's beautiful. And it's a real, it's one of the outcomes and benefits of working together with others.
Awesome. Does anyone want to share anything at this point, or any questions at this point?
Go, Bruce.
Thanks. Earlier this morning, in the first of these sessions, we talked about social enterprise networks. And it seems to me what you're talking about is a real immediate application of a need that the group brought up, which is, yes, there are nationwide or regional or even local groups of people working to apply social enterprise methodologies to meet human needs, solve social problems. And yet in Aotearoa, we do not have a nationwide coordinating group that really is doing what you are describing as backboning, you know, that brings all of those groups together, the practitioners, the organizations, including government, etc., to say, okay, how do we move together, you know, as a movement? And so I'm just finding myself thinking through your methodology, your principles, to wonder, and this is my open question, you know, what would a backboning organization or a backboning movement look like for Aotearoa in the social enterprise or the social innovation space?
Wow, loving that. Who, I mean, Helene, I'm looking to Helene too, like, because I mean, how valuable of you to share that with us, Bruce, not coming from that space. You know, I'm not aware what the current system looks like. And so it's really interesting to hear that in the conversations over the week, people are sensing that gap. And so, Helene, I can see you've taken off mute. Would you want to speak into the space?
Yeah, I was part of the conversation as well. And so where we got to was, because it was on the back of a session that happened on the global stage as Social Enterprise World Forum, where people from different networks, including Nicola Patrick, who we've been working with at the Aotearoa Foundation, and who's part of the Impact Initiative, and I'll hand over to Matthew in a minute, you know, was part of. And these networks were different because some of the networks were practitioner-led, and others, you know, the one Nicola was representing, who's you know, part of the Impact Initiative, is a network of intermediaries, because for a range of reasons, we, and I say we because that's when I was part of Aotearoa last year, you know, decided that we had enough, you know, insights to make the call to start with creating that kind of backbone network organization of intermediaries and supporters and capability builders, if you wish, in order to start strengthening the social enterprise ecosystem. And so the gap that we identified in that conversation was that there's no such network for the practitioners themselves to connect. So, you know, there were a few like aspects to these networks and movements that were identified around, you know, transfer of knowledge, as we've just talked about. You know, you talked about, you know, reciprocity and opening up channels of information. And I think, you know, that's happening with the great work of the Aotearoa Foundation and the Impact Initiative. You know, there's all of the work around, you know, influencing and advocating that obviously is starting to happen with this kind of, with the 3-year, you know, partnership with government. And maybe it's just still budding, you know, it's still, there's probably more to be done there. But yeah, there was this big question around connectivity, which is a funny one because, you know, you would think that, oh, does it only take like a Slack channel and let's get going? Because connectivity, you know, these days, you know, could be seen as being super easy because we've got so many channels available to us. But obviously, maybe not that easy because we're still feeling that gap, or practitioners doing the work on the ground are still feeling that gap within the social enterprise sector.
Yeah, and it's still at that, that's right. I think that there's probably a real movement starting now that we've with COVID. You know, a piece of work that I'm the impact strategist for is looking at the regenerative food system. And in fact, a lot of us in here are looking at those sorts of things. And the regenerative food system itself's got a real big piece around that sits around social enterprise. And I think there's this kind of, you know, how sometimes it's all about the timing. And you know, this kind of feels like the timing of a more coordinated approach around it, considering what's happening in the world. But yeah, Aotearoa, I was going to say Aotearoa's played a significant part. So has Edmund Hillary, the fellowship, in terms of the social enterprise model.
Yes, yeah. So Matthew represents the Impact Initiative as well on this call. So maybe Matthew, you want to add to know what I've said? Yeah.
Yeah, what I say, because it's perfect timing, Bruce, that you bring this up. We're just in the process of putting together the final recommendations to government. So I might catch up with you in Wellington in a couple of weeks. But the issue that we've struggled with around this is it's three-dimensional. So do you gather people together and a backbone, because you need the common cause from listening to Annie and Rebecca. And so is the common cause around geography. And so you're getting all the social enterprises in a particular area together, and you need you want to meet with your peers in the Bay of Plenty, or you meet with your peers in Marlborough or wherever. Or are you getting together around an industry? So we have that for the zero waste industry. We have the Zero Waste Network, and we all gather around waste and resource recovery.
Yeah.
Or are you going to get together around impact area? You know, so like, is it about employment or climate change or waste diversion? And so I guess that's the struggle with social enterprise being so broad, which makes it so awesome, is that you can cut and slice it whichever way you want. And so a peak body or a backboning organization around that is you're sort of trying to choose which way do you go. So it's a really interesting conversation. I'd love to carry it on. Yeah.
And then I would add, Matthew, then a fourth dimension, if you will, is all of the different sectors or groups that are interested.
Yeah.
You know, so as Elaine mentioned, there's the practitioners, but then there are the networks, you know, the intermediate organizations, and then there's government, academia. You know, social entrepreneurship is taught in a number of universities, and yet, by my experience, is not connected at all with the practitioner movement. So, you know, how do all of these different spaces come, you know, all these different players come together as yet another dimension?
Indeed.
I mean, from our experience, it's conversations, you know, like these, and then with all the different people in the ecosystem to really understand the context from the diversity of perspectives, the ones that you've already named, to understand and also give license to them to almost there's several pieces, right? Because you can do that, what do you want? But sometimes people don't know what they want. So the role of a backbone, you know, the way Bex and I play it is really, we do a lot of sense making, and we do a lot of critical analysis and strategy on behalf of, because of what we've learned, you know, because of what we've support a collective to know. And I feel like that's where you're at, is that you're understanding there are these different components and elements and groups of people that need to be serviced. And it's how you have those conversations so that this, you know, so that a solution can be reached. And I want to say it's not a massive undertaking. I mean, I know that it feels like it, and that there are many parts. But I'd be happy to stay on the line after and we can absolutely chat more, because it can be done. Aotearoa's small enough.
Hey, just on that, there were two things that there were three things, but the two things that we were going to finish the session with, but two things to talk about, and then one was a doing thing, but we're probably going to run out of time for the doingness. One of the things we talk about too is that backbone teams are biodegradable, and you would have seen it in our framework. So, and what I love about this concept of being biodegradable is it stops people from backing something because it's their job that's invested in it. And secondly, it shows that movements can take their own life, and at some point in the journey, they need to be, often movements will be self-managing and self-organising themselves, where a backbone is no longer required, but it's owned and fostered by the collective and has spread pretty much, as you all know. I mean, we've all been through many movements in our time. But I do love that. So we talk about that right up front with people. We are biodegradable. We are here until this takes hold. Again, it just stops people from being personally invested in keeping a job. So the role of the backbone is not that at all. And it removes that programmatic mindset that often exists with people when that's an FTE kōrero. So the second thing was leadership, the kind of leadership that is required nowadays to support this type of model, this backboning, and then the collectives who are coming together to create momentum. There's a real shift, there's a real pivot. So when we were doing the workplace wellbeing, we reimagined what are the types of leaders that we want in business. And we designed, and he talked about strong business, strong community concept that we did, we literally imagined who would be CEO of these organisations and created personas and what would really matter to them. And so things that we knew would really matter would be that they would be environmentally friendly, that they would be ethical, and that they would believe in ethical work practice. They would be innovative. They would champion wellbeing and happy, productive staff, which, by the way, which was our learning on our first prototype with the Cause Collective, was that wellbeing improved productivity and innovation. So, and it was in a major big business in South Auckland. It was one of our biggest findings, or not biggest findings, it was one of our greatest moments, was to discover that it improved productivity and innovation. So, but it took a type of leadership to do what we required and suggested. Annie?
I'm just mindful of time, Tan. Do you...
Well,
Ruby?
Keep going.
Closing thoughts? Oh.
Yeah, you could probably do some closing thoughts. Well, we'll certainly keep the room open for those that just want to have an individual conversation with our facilitators. So yeah, if we could finish up with the closing comments, that would be great.
Yeah, I think I'll close on the kind of leaders that we're interested in working with, but also as backbone people like you, that we should all be thinking about our role as being. So there are 5 things. Number 1 is ambassador. We are the face of change. We are the face of what it means to backbone and what it takes. And so to really step into that space and, you know, kind of be an amazing ambassador for impact and for change and for collectivism. The second is to be a provocateur. Like, we are not run-of-the-mill BAU people. We are people who will push the envelope. So I want to encourage you in that and to align yourself with people and leaders like that. We are culture and talent cultivators. We are growing the generation and generation to come to be amazing leaders. So let's think about our roles in that as backboners. We are the guardians. We are the ones who hold the vision, the kaupapa, our community's aspirations in everything we do. And so to encourage you in that role. And lastly, you are often the conductor. And so to keep your eye, you know, to be able to keep your eye on many balls and keep them in the air and be really clever and smart. And so in closing, I just want to say bless you in your roles and in what you're trying to do. And yeah, it's been wonderful spending time with you.
Awesome.